So
hello everyone, thanks for joining us today. I might get started. We've still got a couple of people trickling in, but welcome to this Law Week event for 2020. My name's Michael Haralambous. I'm from the Centre for Innovative Justice at RMIT University, and I'm joined today by my colleague Dorothy Armstrong. Dorothy, how are you?
Really well, Michael. How are you?
I'm good. I'm hoping that this technology holds up today, but
Same.
I'm confident that it will.
Yep.
I'm going to put positive things out there. Okay, so to start, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're streaming from today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I acknowledge the continuing connection to land and culture despite years of dispossession, colonisation and over-incarceration of Aboriginal people. Today, Dorothy and I are going to be talking about acquired brain injury and the criminal justice system, covering some of the work that CIJ has done over the last couple of years. But before we get into the presentation, I just wanted to note that we should have some time at the end for some Q&A. There is a function with this technology where you can ask questions, so please ask questions as you go. We have Heidi, Amanda and Hugh on the back end supporting us today, and they'll be able to manage those questions, and we'll get to them at the end if we have time. We should also have an auto-created transcript and recording of the presentation today, and hopefully we can publish those in the coming weeks, as long as the technology works. All right, my background, I'm a criminal lawyer. I've worked for Victoria Legal Aid and Aboriginal Legal Service before joining the team at the Centre for Innovative Justice to work on the disability projects. And I'm here with Dorothy, as I mentioned just before. Dorothy is a Victorian Disability Award winner for her advocacy work for women with disability in the criminal justice system. She was a participant in the Justice User Group for CIJ's Enabling Justice project and is now an advisor and peer support worker on the Supporting Justice project. Dorothy, you'll be sharing some of your lived experience with us today, and we're very grateful to have you with us. So thank you.
It's a pleasure, Michael. Thank you for asking me to talk with you today.
All right, so I thought we'd start today by talking about what is an acquired brain injury. So an acquired brain injury refers to damage to the brain that occurs after birth. It can affect things like cognitive and thinking skills, communication and speech, physical and sensory functions, and emotions and behaviours. It's a spectrum disorder, so people with different variations in their ABI might experience the nature and severity of their symptoms differently, depending on the location and the extent of the injury to the brain. People with acquired brain injury do not generally experience an even decline across every aspect of their functioning. You can have people with very significant brain injuries that require 24-hour care, and many people with more mild impairments who, for them, the acquired brain injury might be a hidden disability as such, and that's why it's very important, particularly in the criminal justice system, for people to be aware of what some of the signs of acquired brain injury are. So some of those signs are a history of injury to the head or spine, including loss of consciousness from violence or injury, substance use, other health conditions such as a degenerative condition or a stroke, people who feel frustrated very easily or have poor self-regulation when feeling overloaded might have an acquired brain injury, being easily disoriented or confused, and particularly a telltale sign is having difficulty with memory, particularly around prioritising events and attending appointments on time. So if you suspect that yourself or someone you work with has an acquired brain injury, a neuropsychological assessment can clarify the diagnosis. Supportingjustice.net, which is a resource that we'll be referring to a lot today, has information on recognising an acquired brain injury, including some links to great organisations like Synapse and BrainLink, which have really fantastic resources and information on their websites about understanding ABI and coming to terms with the diagnosis. So Dorothy, you're with us today. You have an acquired brain injury. Are you able to share with us a little bit about when you found out about your diagnosis and how you sustained your injury?
Certainly. Firstly, though, I'd like to say, Michael, that sort of the description of symptoms, if you will, that you just talked about, I relate a lot to that. I suppose I suffered from a lot of them for a really, really long time, and I didn't understand why I did. But for me, my acquired brain injury wasn't actually confirmed until the end, and I know this is putting it sort of politely, the end of my justice experience, if you will. I was actually in prison. I hadn't been in prison very long. And yeah, I had it confirmed, you know, through a letter that I did have an acquired brain injury at that point.
So you were already in custody at the point where you found out?
Yes.
Yeah. So now we wanted to talk about acquired brain injury in the criminal justice system, and as many of you will be aware, acquired brain injury is hugely overrepresented in the criminal justice system. 33% of women and 42% of men have an acquired brain injury in Victorian prisons. That's in comparison to a prevalence of around 2% in the general Australian community. So these figures came from a 2011 study by the Department of Justice in Victoria, but the reality is that no one knows on a day-to-day basis how many people there are in prison with disability, but it's broadly accepted that there continues to be a significant overrepresentation. So acquired brain injury, as I mentioned before, can be a hidden disability. Many people with ABI do not have obvious physical impairments and can often cycle through the criminal justice system without their support needs being addressed. Many of the characteristics of ABI, such as problems with memory, impulse control, exposure to violence and substance abuse, can bring people into contact with the justice system. But more importantly, the justice system not being able to respond to those types of characteristics can make it very difficult for people with acquired brain injury to leave the system. So, Dorothy, turning back to you, looking back at your experience of the justice system, you only found out about your acquired brain injury right at the end. But yeah, reflecting on your experiences, did having an acquired brain injury impact on you? Or?
That's a really good question, and I can't help but answer absolutely. And I think it's really important for me to let people know that the person that you're looking at today and listening to is not the person that I've always been. And what I mean by that is I've had periods of my life where I've had such damage done from violence to my brain, I was actually not able to communicate with people at all. And that's a really terrifying thing to live with, is not being able to communicate with another human being, and especially being, you know, having police involvement or being in the justice system, even more frightening. Yeah, so what I found that I commonly experienced was that if I couldn't, you know, coherently put, you know, a statement together, like a blow-by-blow description of what had happened to me, I was tended to not be believed by police. I've also had responses from police where there was actually no response at all. You know, ringing 000, you know, desperate for help and intervention, and, you know, police not showing up at all. So I've had a lot of experiences like that, and yeah, really, it was quite horrendous, to be honest with you.
And Dorothy, we can only imagine what you were going through, but you had experience of the criminal justice system not only as someone who was charged with offences, but also someone who asked for the protection of police at times.
Yes.
What impact of having an acquired brain injury had on your interactions with police when you were a victim?
Sadly for me, quite similarly, or quite similar to, you know, when it was me being charged, that I was always alone with police. I never had anybody with me. I've learnt today, you know, from the Centre for Innovative Justice about the independent third person. I'd never heard about that at all in my life, and that is a person who, for people who have, you know, cognitive impairments, can actually sit in on interviews with people. I knew nothing about that. I was always a woman alone, you know, with police, and very vulnerable. You know, more often than not, I presented injured, very visibly beaten and injured, and to say I was vulnerable would be a complete understatement. And unfortunately, yeah, I certainly experienced abuse, different sorts of abuse at the hands of police.
That's really shocking, Dorothy, and particularly when you talk about presenting with injuries and still not being able to access the types of supports that are available within the criminal justice system. It's really quite a shocking account, and unfortunately something that we imagine is quite common. So we want to shift now just to talk a little bit about some of the work that CIJ has been doing in this space. The Centre for Innovative Justice with the Jesuit Social Services undertook the Enabling Justice project, which explored ways to address the over-incarceration of people with acquired brain injury by putting those who have direct experience with the criminal justice system and prison systems at the centre of the discussion. So this project achieved that by establishing a justice user group of people with acquired brain injury and lived experience of the criminal justice system. This group informed the project's activities, recommendations and findings. And some of those findings, the project found that people with acquired brain injury in the justice system often did not have their disability needs recognised, and Dorothy just provided a really clear articulation of the consequences of that, and that the system failed time and time again to provide them with respect and support. So on the screen, we've got the name of the 2017 report. You can access that on our website, cij.org.au. The key finding of the report is that the gross overrepresentation of people with acquired brain injury in our prison system will only be reduced if the voices of people with ABI are taken seriously and their needs are addressed by the criminal justice system. So Dorothy, again, you were involved in the Justice User Group for the Enabling Justice project, yes. Who were central to the development of the project's 35 recommendations and its 2017 report. Are you able to share with us what it was like to be part of this project?
Without being incredibly excited, it really was quite life-changing for me. I had never encountered people who cared so much about injustice and wanting to make things different for people, and I was completely taken by that. About the Centre for Innovative Justice. I have incredible respect for them for many reasons, and that's one of them. But it was quite incredible to work with people who were generally interested in what had happened. I mean, not just me personally, but to somebody like me with an acquired brain injury and who, you know, had been through the criminal justice system, for want of a better term. And perhaps what could be done differently, and that was a really wonderful thing that happened to me, to experience that. And then, as you also mentioned, Michael, you know, a justice user group, it's really quite an incredible feeling to think that there's an opportunity to turn really horrendous things that have happened into something, or to perhaps help make things different for, you know, similar people in the future.
So what we're going to do now is just go through really quickly those three key themes of the Enabling Justice report: recognition, respect and support, and talk about the ways the criminal justice system can do better to respond to acquired brain injury. I'm sorry, I forgot to turn off my mute. So I'll just repeat that. Sorry, Dorothy and everyone. What we're going to do now is just really quickly go over those three key themes of the Enabling Justice report: recognition, respect and support, and talk about ways the criminal justice system can do better to respond to acquired brain injury. The first the theme that we're going to be talking about is recognising acquired brain injury. So acquired brain injury, as mentioned, can be a hidden disability. Certainly the experiences of many of the people with lived experience who CIJ has worked with have spoken of experiences where their disability was not recognised by criminal justice system workers, and as a flow-on, their disability support needs went unaddressed. Many of the Enabling Justice reports recommendations, and certainly a big part of the work that CIJ is doing now with the Supporting Justice project is to encourage people in the criminal justice system to feel comfortable recognising and responding to the signs of disability. A big part of that is making sure that people learn the signs, but also adjust the way they practice law, operate courts, deliver services to make sure reasonable adjustments can be made where necessary and that there is time to ask the right questions. So again, supportingjustice.net, practical tips and introductory information about acquired brain injury. It has some information on recognising the signs, those links to further reading, but also has a downloadable preparing for court form, which has been designed to encourage conversations that might uncover the signs of undiagnosed acquired brain injury and encourage practitioners to engage in conversations with their clients around the right communication strategies and support needs of their clients. And that might be for a client with an acquired brain injury, or just might be for someone who prefers to be communicated in a particular way. These are types of conversations that don't regularly happen in the criminal justice system as it's operated at the moment, but something we know that close to the majority of people moving through the system have some form of disability, and if we're training ourselves to have these types of conversations with everyone in the system, we're only going to get better outcomes. So there's the downloadable preparing for court form on the website and lots of other resources that people can sink their teeth in. So I really encourage you to have a look at that website. And that form I mentioned, preparing for court form, Dorothy, you were really key to the development of that resource. You worked with us to develop supportingjustice.net.
It is a favourite of mine.
And you often talk about asking the question. And you mentioned already in this presentation that you learnt of your diagnosis right at the end of your criminal justice system experience.
Yeah.
What would you encourage lawyers and other criminal justice system workers to do to recognise disability with the people they're working with?
That's a really good question, Michael. I think in part, something I think that would make an incredible difference is being disability and trauma aware and have training, but also you actually said the phrase asking the question, because for me, my experience is that in spite of the many times that I presented visibly battered, ripped clothing, it was obvious that I had been, physically beaten and assaulted. Nobody ever asked me. Nobody ever asked me if I was okay. Nobody ever asked me if I needed to see a doctor. Nobody ever asked me if I'd had any kind of testing done. Nobody asked me. And in saying that, I'd also like to mention that I can appreciate how incredibly difficult it is to see somebody, in that state. I know how I feel when I see somebody who's visibly injured. So in a way I could understand, but really it still blows my mind that with the different experiences I had of being a victim, and looking to police for help, or, being an offender, I was never asked questions about the state of my well-being, and even if I needed help. It astounds me. So that's why, for me, just asking a simple question.
I think that's really good advice. I think a lot of people in the criminal justice system can be nervous about asking questions that they don't know how to respond to if they get the answer they suspect. And that's why supportingjustice.net and some of the things that you've helped us develop, Dorothy, out there to encourage people to have these conversations, because the criminal justice system It's not a pleasant place to be, but it is an opportunity to have to achieve some really significant positive change in someone's life if people know how to access the right supports.
I agree with you, Michael. Yeah.
And that kind of leads into the next thing that we're talking about, and you mentioned it already about disability and trauma awareness. But one of the other key themes of the Enabling Justice Report is respect. And so in this context, it's about making sure that the people who work in the criminal justice system have the appropriate tools to be trauma and disability informed workers, practitioners, judicial officers. It's also about ensuring that the justice process is accessible and that a person who is charged is involved in a meaningful way with the decision-making process. Again, supportingjustice.net has a communication guide, which has a very brief and is really a jumping off point to more reading about disability rights, language and awareness. It also has links to trauma awareness training tools that exist online and a guide for judicial officers as well. But I think Dorothy really hit the nail on the head. It's about being respectful to the people in the system and knowing the right language to use, and not to get hung up on that kind of thing, but to know where to send people, and that's part of it. So if you have a look on supportingjustice.net, that communication guide, that's a really great starting point. The final of the three themes of enabling justice is support, and that's about knowing where to find the right support in the criminal justice system. So if you ask these questions, you recognise disability, you do it in a respectful way, where do you go to get support? And many legal practitioners, and I'm talking from experience here, we don't necessarily recognise the agency that we have to make a significant difference in the lives of our clients. We tend to have a relatively short-sighted view of our role as it relates specifically to the criminal law matter at hand. Actually, the process of preparing a bail application, a plea, or even guiding a person through a contested matter, such as a trial or a summary contested hearing, is going to be made much, much more effective if the person at the centre of the process can have the right supports to maintain a stable life in the community. So it's actually, it's not about being a therapeutic lawyer, although that's certainly not a bad thing. It's about being a competent lawyer and knowing how to support your client through what is, for the vast majority of people, the worst experience of their life. So today, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, it makes things a little bit more complicated, but it also opens a lot of opportunities to connect people with meaningful and sustainable supports. And it's essential that criminal lawyers have a basic level of competency in how that scheme operates. So supportingjustice.net, we've created a practical guide for lawyers to the NDIS and finding disability support. And again, it's a jumping off point to other more detailed resources online about the NDIS. But support isn't just about disability supports, although they're important. It's also about knowing where to find housing for your clients, and housing is, an issue that isn't going away anytime soon, and it can be very difficult to navigate that system. It's about knowing where to get the right mental health support and things like that. Dorothy, again, I'd like to draw you back in here, and I'd like to ask you to talk about something that you've told me in the past about an experience where you were preparing for your release from prison and you were having a conversation around housing. And yes. Are you able to share that experience?
Certainly, Michael. It's really unpleasant, but so as you said, I was getting to a point where I would be eligible for parole, and I was called in, speaking with this particular officer about where I was going to live, when I was released, and I didn't have anywhere to live. I'd had my home trashed, from a previous partner before I went to prison. So effectively I was homeless before I went to prison. And I was also in a completely different area to where I'd been living. And I didn't have anybody. I didn't have anywhere to go. And I certainly didn't know who to ask for help. And this offer was really adamant and, badgering me to come up with a name. and telling me, which I absolutely believed, that if I couldn't provide an address, that I wouldn't be released and I'd be serving, you know, my full sentence in prison. And very begrudgingly, you know, I offered a particular person's name, and this was merely an acquaintance. It was the only person in the world that I, you know, could offer. I'd met them, you know, say a month prior to going to prison, and I made it really clear to the officer I didn't want to be involved in, you know, calling this person or asking this person if they would do this. Long story short, the officer called this woman, and, you know, I was eternally grateful to find out that she was willing, you know, for me to move there upon my release, and that was wonderful. However, after 3 days of being there, that situation broke down, and I was actually homeless again, and I was terrified of being sent back to prison, you know, from not having somewhere stable to live. And so what continued to happen for me was on a daily basis, using public phones, of, you know, calling up all the different housing services and, you know, all sorts of places to try to find somewhere to sleep each day, until actually got to a point where I was offered, you know, through social housing. I was actually offered, I was offered long-term housing, but that was quite a while after leaving prison. So that was really, really frightening time, and that was really, really hard. Yeah.
I think it's a good illustration.
I think it's a good illustration where an opportunity to connect someone with supports is missed, and the onus is placed wholly on the individual with the least number of levers. And housing is a really good example of that. And I think in the criminal justice system, particularly around issues for bail, practitioners, support workers, we all have this tendency to want to latch on to any address that's given to us. But maybe what's required of us is to have a better understanding of the social housing system. So it's not up to the individual to fall into housing support. Dorothy, you found in the end, it's a happy story. You're here today. You found support in a supported accommodation building, and that's won the lottery in some ways, but it's still very challenging.
Yes.
But it's important for practitioners, support workers to know what the support landscape is. So we've prepared a really short video for you now, which just walks through the website which we developed last year. So hopefully it works. This is one of the challenges with this technology. So just bear with us. We'll try and bring that up now. Welcome to supportingjustice.net, an online resource developed by the Centre for Innovative Justice at RMIT University and Paper Giant. This website has been designed for court and legal professionals to help them better support people with cognitive disability in the criminal justice system. Supportingjustice.net includes information about disability in the criminal justice system, practical guides and resources for court and legal professionals, people with disability and their supporters, information on services and programs, and the personal stories of people with disability who have had lived experience of the criminal justice system. People with disability are significantly overrepresented in our criminal justice system. The facts section of supportingjustice.net includes introductory information on acquired brain injury, autism spectrum disorder, dual disability, and intellectual disability. It includes an introduction to recognising the signs of disability and links to further reading and resources. People with disability often feel overlooked and unsupported in the criminal justice system. The personal stories section includes profiles of Tom and Poppy from the Centre for Innovative Justice and the Jesuit Social Services Enabling Justice project. Following their stories, the page includes links to resources on the website that have been designed to respond to the lived experiences of people like Poppy and Tom. People with disability, lawyers, court staff and judicial officers
We're all involved in developing the resources on supportingjustice.net. Under Resources for Lawyers, Judicial Officers and Court Professionals, you can find practical guides and downloads to help you better support people with disability in the criminal justice system. These practical guides include information on accessing the National Disability Insurance Scheme, effective communication with people with disability, and a Preparing for Court form to help people with disability better prepare for their first meeting with their lawyer. SupportingJustice.net includes a downloadable workshop kit which can be adapted to support professionals wanting to prepare professional learning activities and promote disability awareness in their organisations. People with disability, support workers and clinical staff can find it difficult knowing how best to prepare for court. SupportingJustice.net includes practical guides to getting legal advice, finding support and preparing for court. Under Services and Programs, SupportingJustice.net includes a guide with contact information for support and disability services relevant to people with disability in the criminal justice system. This page includes links to other service directories such as Ask Izzy, as well as specific information on court dates, the NDIS, family violence, victim and witness services, Aboriginal community controlled organisations and more. Thank you for watching. If you have any further questions or feedback, please contact the Centre for Innovative Justice at cij@rmit.edu.au.
Great, well, thank you for watching that video.
Thank you for watching that video. It's always jarring hearing your own voice. But anyway, I guess I have to get used to it these days with living in isolation. On the screen now, we have the Supporting Justice System map. So the website, which we just showed you a little preview of, is part of a much larger project that the Centre for Innovative Justice commenced in late 2018 called Supporting Justice, which Dorothy and I are both project team members of. The project is building on the work that was undertaken in the Enabling Justice project and is taking a systems change approach to addressing the overrepresentation of people with disability in the criminal justice system. So as part of that work, we developed this system map, which you can see now. It's obviously very hard to read on a desktop or much less a phone if you're watching on a phone today. We have it printed out in hard copy. It's about 3 meters long and it visualizes the factors that impact a person with disability as they move through the criminal justice system. It's a pretty big piece of work putting together this system map. And the reason why we did it is that we wanted to bring in a really broad group of stakeholders from justice, disability, social services sectors to use this map to see the visualization of how complicated and fractured the criminal justice system is for people with disability, and use the map to identify opportunities where projects could intervene to create positive change. So last year, at the end of that process, we met with a number of people. We identified 4 priority areas under which the project is now working to get projects off the ground. So these 4 areas are housing, early intervention, disability and trauma awareness, and system collaboration and information sharing. And so we now have these ideas, and we're out there talking to people, trying to get some change happening. Now, some of the benefits of using this approach, using a complicated map, is that we identified through this process that housing is such a significant factor. So many of these spaghetti lines on this map that you're seeing come back to homelessness, and particularly talking to people with lived experience. The lack of safe, ongoing housing in the community was a real significant factor in cycling in and out of custody, particularly for people with complex needs and disability. So another key part of the Supporting Justice project is building the capacity of people with lived experience to be a meaningful part of the policy making that develops solutions to these problems. As part of that, we worked with the Self-Advocacy Resource Unit at Melbourne's Ross House to develop Voices for Justice training for people with acquired brain injury and lived experience of the criminal justice system. Dorothy, you were really heavily involved in in setting up this training and working with the participants.
Yes.
Are you able to maybe share a little bit about what Voices for Justice training is and what the graduates have chosen to do?
Certainly. So Voices for Justice initially was about bringing men and women, like you've said, who had experience of the criminal justice system and an acquired brain injury together. And for me, one of the most surprising things was that almost from day one, the group actually bonded, or sorry, the people in the group actually bonded really, really well. Everybody got along. It was actually quite a wonderful thing to see that we all had quite similar and also different experiences in our life, but the training, as you mentioned, came from the Self-Advocacy Resource Unit, SARU, and there was a justice element added to it, I say obviously because of the group that we were working with, and it was quite an incredible experience. We met 2 days a week for quite a period of time, and the group graduated in December, but long before graduation, the members of the group were really clear and firm about the fact that they actually wanted to stay together as a group, and started talking about how that could happen, and ultimately what was talked about, suggested and decided upon was becoming a self advocacy group, and that's exactly what the people are today. They're actually Voices for Change. The training was Voices for Justice. The group is now called Voices for Change, and I still find it quite remarkable that in spite of all of their experiences, they're one of the most motivated, committed, enthusiastic group of people that I've had the pleasure to meet and spend time with. It's really quite wonderful, Michael.
I 100% echo.
I absolutely echo what you're saying, Dorothy, about the group being really motivated. It was the group, as you said, Voices for Change, a self-advocacy group. They're continuing to meet today, and actually as part of their work to create a submission to the Royal Commission into Violence, Abuse, Neglect and Exploitation of People with Disability, the Voices for Change worked with us here at CIJ to develop a really short podcast series called Our Voices. And I'm really, really excited today to say that it's gone live, and we should be able to tweet a link to where you can listen to the podcast. The first episode will drop today, and we'll drop subsequent episodes every Tuesday. And the podcast series is some of the group members talking about their experiences and what they want changed and what they want the Royal Commission to consider. It's really fantastic, and I really hope that people listening today might be able to follow along with us. I've prepared a short clip of the series that I want to play for you now, so you get a sneak peek, I guess, although it's already live. We'll see if we can make the video work. Just a warning, the audio might be a little bit quiet, which is 100% down to my editing skills, but we'll see if we can get that video up for you now.
How are we okay? Good to see you, Bill. So, what's our agenda? What are we talking about?
During this series, we will introduce 5 voices for change and self-advocacy. Hear about the change they want to see in Victoria's justice system. Top of government's prohibition to violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation of victims. Provide the opportunity to capture labor in Australia's criminal justice system and respond better to victims, and to ensure that our jails do not become warehouses for criminals.
pretty neat. Yeah, probably nerve
All right, I'm really sorry, guys. We seem to be having some issues with the audio there, but what I'll do is I'll make sure that we tweet out a link to the podcast series so everyone can jump on and listen to that. And Dorothy, in place of the video, maybe you can give us a really quick rundown of what your favourite parts were of the podcast series. You've listened to all the episodes.
Oh, not enough time, Michael. My favourite part, quite honestly, for me, listening to the members talk, listening individually to their stories, I was moved by each of them. And I mean, obviously I was present, you know, for some of them, but I was so touched and moved to hear what these people had shared so very kindly and openly. I'm really grateful that we're able to do the podcast at all, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to hear you know, other people's feedback from them. But I really appreciated the members and their sharing them, all of them.
Absolutely, it was a really fantastic process to be part of, and those podcast episodes will be sent to the Royal Commission along with. Sorry, I keep forgetting to switch my microphone off.
Absolutely, Dorothy. It's very much. It was very much a great process to be part of,
Yeah.
recording those episodes and hearing those stories, and it's fantastic that they're out there for people to listen to now. Those episodes will be sent to the Royal Commission and will be accompanied by a short submission from some of the themes that the group have raised in their episodes. So I think Heidi is going to email out the link to the first episode, and we'll tweet it on our social media as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. So that brings us to the end of the formal presentation as such, but we have some time now left on the stream for anyone who has any questions. And I saw a question earlier about the system map. That map we have been providing to people in the criminal justice system to help with planning, with strategy. We're happy to come to organisations in Victoria at least, and maybe we can digitally link with people interstate if there's anyone interstate listening. We're happy to share our learnings from that process and share that resource with you. If you're interested, please just send me an email. I think Heidi's put my email address in the Q&A chat. Otherwise, you can access it from the project page at cij.org.au. So yeah, absolutely get in touch if you're interested in having a look at that map. We can try and facilitate it as best we can during these times. Let's have a look. I'm just going to read one of the questions. So just give me back. This question relates to Dorothy's experience with housing. Is the CIJ aware that those that are on remand in medium-level correctional centres in Victoria, there is limited support, for example, in housing, that a housing worker can give the inmate, given they are not sentenced and are at risk of being released the day of court? Hence, it is up to them to get themselves to a housing worker, which is potentially very difficult for a person, and is a gap where potentially the person may resort to self-harm in some form to cope. Is there anything the CIJ are doing to see that this gap is filled for those with acquired brain injury and other complex needs? And thank you, Dorothy, for sharing your experience. That's a really great question. And again, thank you, Dorothy, for sharing your experiences. I think that's very important for me to note. I think the housing question is really difficult. Housing in Victoria has been a challenging area for many, many years now. We saw that there was an announcement of some funding this week, which is absolutely welcomed. But housing, as it relates to the criminal justice system, is really tricky. So there's a small pool of housing available for people through the Court Integrated Services program called the Justice Housing Pool, which is managed by Launch Housing, I believe. But it's not enough. There needs to be more stock, and we're absolutely in talks with the people who have the power to create this stock to try and partner with them to get something going. But you've identified a really key issue, which is that there is not enough housing for people on remand, and it's really difficult if we put all the onus on the individual to find the housing. What I guess we would say is that there are other people in the criminal justice system, the person's lawyer, who might actually have more agency than they recognise in terms of being able to connect a person who's in that situation with the right types of supports. But it's absolutely not working at the moment, and that's what our system map identified. So hopefully that answers your question.
Could I respond a little bit to that also, Michael?
Yes, please do, Dorothy.
Thank you for asking that question. I can't speak to any issues about being on remand. I wasn't on remand. For me, I was actually in the cells for a period of time before I actually, went to prison. But for me, one of the striking things was I was never given any information. I never actually saw any information about any kind of housing services whatsoever. So when I was actually released from prison, I had no idea. I didn't even know names of housing services, here in Melbourne, and it was purely, picking up leaflets and things as I went around that I started to learn about the different places here in Melbourne. That's my experience, anyway.
So I've just learned how to use the Q&A function a little bit better. So I'm sorry. I've got we've got lots of questions to get through, so I'll try and go as quickly as possible. Yep. The first question we have is, were there specialist services in custody to support you with your ABI, Dorothy? Did the floor staff have the proper expertise to support you?
That's a really good question. And what I'll say for me is that I didn't tell anybody. So all of your mail is opened in prison. I didn't tell anybody about having a confirmed acquired brain injury, and even though I hadn't been in prison that long, I'd already become really clear about the fact that the care factor really wasn't there. So talking to an officer about it wasn't an option. It wasn't an option, and I certainly didn't disclose that or discuss that, with any of the women in there. But in saying that, I don't know the complete ins and outs of prison, but I was aware of other women in there who were very visibly, or had quite, visible disabilities. And I saw the way they were treated, and it was quite horrendous. So for me, it wasn't the space to show or to have any kind of vulnerabilities. Yeah, it was hard.
So the next question we have is, what could courts do differently to better respond to the needs of women and or people with acquired brain injury? And this is a conversation we're continuing to have with Court Services Victoria. I think there's a lot of really goodwill in the court system about wanting to do better. I think a really key thing, and hopefully this came across in our presentation, is that courts at the moment are very stressful experiences for everyone. They're not designed in a way to promote the participation of the people who use them the most, which for the most part are people like Dorothy with an acquired brain injury, or some other disability that might make it difficult. They're insofar as courts are designed, they're designed for people like myself, like lawyers. They're not designed for the people. So more of a focus on the people using the courts would be a really good start. And there's some great examples from around the world of courts that have tried to incorporate some human-centered design. There's a project going on at the moment in the Children's Court that's trying to incorporate more human design into the way that the court operates, and that's a really good starting point. There are some resources on supportingjustice.net. It's a guide for judicial officers, which touches on the way that the existing system can be used to make a more accessible courtroom experience for people with disability. So tips about the way a matter is dealt with, the language that's used from the bench, and using some of the skills, some of the tools such as deferral of sentence and other things, and the existing resources that exist, such as the assessment and referral court, where it's available. Being aware of those tools that you have, that's a starting point. So I think if you have a look at that page. But Dorothy, did you have anything to add there about courts in particular, what they could do better?
I think generally, Michael, you've summed it up. I think it's really about a starting point. Yeah, I don't think there's much more that I can add to that, though.
And Dorothy, we've got a lot of questions for you about how did you discover that you had an acquired brain injury when you were in the system? I think you mentioned that you'd had the test prior to being placed in custody, and then the results were confirmed once you were in custody.
Yes.
And there's also a question around how you sustained your acquired brain injury. Are you able just to talk to that just briefly for people?
Yeah. Firstly, thank you for the questions. It's really appreciated. For me, and really it is about, in hindsight, looking back, and thankfully I have the ability to do that. One of the many things I grew up with was family violence, and I come from a very large family, and for me, I was very aware at a young age. I predominantly grew up with my brothers. I was aware at quite a young age, especially around 16, 17, I noted a very big difference in the way that my mind worked, and almost a bit like a bit of a personality change. And for me, and I'm just talking about my life experiences, sadly, I went on to make really poor choices, about the men that I was with, and, domestic violence was, quite a part of my life. So for me, violence is what caused my acquired brain injury. And sort of answering the first question that was asked, is that particular place I presented so often at the hospital, damaged, injured, and yeah, I had a whole heap of tests done, and there wasn't a great deal of time between when that happened and then when I actually went into custody. So it was, letters from that place confirming, but I knew that I was a different person every day of my life. I hated myself because I just knew there was something really wrong with me, but I didn't know what it was, and it was horrendous for me every day of my life to literally have these experiences and to not know and understand why. So I hope that's helped to answer that question for you.
Absolutely, Dorothy, and I think it's
absolutely, Dorothy, and I think it's also a really good illustration of why you had times when you went through the criminal justice system before you got your custodial sentence, and recognising that they were opportunities for you to get a neuropsychological assessment to have that diagnosis confirmed, and that might have opened up other support pathways for you. So I think that's something that I wanted to note as well. We have so many questions. I don't know if we're going to get to all of them today, but I'm just going to do a really rapid fire and just address some of them. Absolutely, most social housing options require a long wait, and that's a significant issue. But if people aren't given the option, they don't know, they don't start waiting until it's too late. So that's part of it. But yes, absolutely, we need more stock. We need more housing options, and our project's certainly trying to encourage policymakers to take that problem very seriously and think about ways we can do better. in terms of addressing whether what alternative approaches there are to imprisonment, there's probably a little bit out of the scope for us to cover today, but we do have we're formally launching Supporting Justice.net next Tuesday. We'll try and distribute the link to that event as well. That event will be slightly different. You'll have Her Honour Magistrate Pauline Spencer, Emily Piggott from Valid, Dorothy Armstrong back, and Stan Winford, my boss, on a panel discussing these issues again. So we'll try and incorporate some of these questions into that panel discussion. And if you're interested in this topic, I really encourage you to come along to that event. We also have Luke Donnell, Minister for Disability, launching the website as well. So really encourage, if you're still tuning in and you want this conversation to continue, it does continue next Tuesday. So please have a look at that event and come along if you can. There's a question here about gaining instructions from your client with an acquired brain injury. SupportingJustice.net has some information on that. It doesn't go into significant detail, but if you go to SupportingJustice.net, there's a link there that will take you to Scope's Supporting Decision Making Guide for legal practitioners, and that's a really excellent resource. So if you have a client with an acquired brain injury, you're struggling to get instructions and you're looking for some guidance, have a look at SupportingJustice.net, the resources there, and click through some of the other links that are there, particularly to Scope's Supporting Decision Making project. I think that's a really good resource that you should have a look at. And there's also a question here about training for assessment officers at court. That's absolutely an issue, and more disability awareness training is needed right across the criminal justice system. And our project is trying to encourage organisations to invest in training and upskill the workforce. But we're really coming at it from a point where there hasn't been a lot of awareness up until this stage of the scope of the issue. So we're trying to raise awareness, and we're trying to encourage policymakers right across the criminal justice system to take this matter seriously. So I think that's our time today. We've kept you for an hour, and I don't want to keep you too long. But before we go, I just wanted to thank Dorothy Armstrong. She's really the star of the show. I don't think many people would have stayed this long if it was just me talking. I certainly wouldn't have. Oh wait, I guess I would have been talking. But thank you, Dorothy. Thank you for sharing your experience with us.
It's a real pleasure, and I'm really grateful that you asked, Michael. And thank you to the people, one who asked questions, but thank you to all of you for listening. Yeah, very much appreciated. Thank you.
And one more plug before we go. We've got another Law Week event this Friday for restorative justice. If you want to have a look at that, please have a look at our Eventbrite page. You can attend that event as well. It'll be fantastic. So people from Open Circle talking about how restorative justice can transform the criminal justice system. And we have the launch of SupportingJustice.net with that fantastic panel and the Minister next week. So please join us for that. Thank you so much for staying. We'll try and distribute a recording and transcript of this this seminar if we can. And in the meantime, stay safe, and thank you for joining us.